Welcome back, podcast friends. Before I get started today, I want to make you aware of something. We are getting ready to rename our podcast. Right now, it's called Simple Healthy Choices for Weight Loss. But we really started looking at it and found out that most of the things that I talk about, even though weight loss is the case with every single one of these, I'm more focused on getting healthy, giving your body nutrients, keep toxins out, and reverse diabetes, but reverse a lot of conditions and get off medications. So, since it's really more about total health and getting off medications, so our new name is going to be the nutrition prescription, wellness versus medications. This isn't going to mean anything as far as you guys go, except for we're planning on making this change around the middle of November. So if you go looking for our podcast, the thumbnail for our podcast, it's going to look a little bit different. It'll have a picture of me on it, but that's what it's going to be. So after this will be nutrition prescription, wellness versus medications. And I'll let you know more about that as time gets closer to make sure that everybody understands that. But I just want to make sure that you understood what we were doing. But as far as the podcast today, what I want to do is I want to explain exactly what fat cells do, why we have fat cells in the first place. Because after talking to a lot of people don't have any idea why we even have fat. They think it's just something that annoys us and something that we have to make sure we don't have too much of, which that is true. But now I just kind of want to explain, how do we get fat? What is the purpose of the fat cells? And does it do more than just store energy, which that's what fat is supposed to be used for, is energy, as well as so many other things. Every single cells or some membranes are lined with fat soluble vitamins. We use fat and cholesterol for everything. It's very vital. Not like the medical communities telling you, saying that cholesterol is bad and all that. That's marketing techniques. We're going to be circling around the fat cell itself. So first, how do we get fat into the fat cell? The biggest way is when you eat glucose. All plant-based foods contain glucose. So if you're getting ready to eat something, look at it and say, did this come from an animal? If that did not come from an animal, it came from a plant, and it does contain glucose. Now, obviously, some plants have more glucose than others. So the plants that grow above the ground, those don't have very much glucose. The ones that grow below the ground, those do have a lot of glucose, like the starch. That's what starch is, just long chains of glucose, because that's the nutrients for the plant. But then the worst, and I'm not against those. It all depends on your health as far as how much of those you want to eat. But if you're really obese, or if you have a lot of conditions, if you're on medications, then you might want to stay away from the plants that grow below the ground, the potatoes, beets, all that kind of stuff. But the one that I really want you to stay away from is man-made food. These are loaded with toxins. They're loaded with glucose, sugar, high fructose corn syrup, ultra-processed seeds, all that. Every time you eat that all through the day, you are you're building up your fat cells. And I'm going to explain why that is. So first, that's what happens. You eat glucose, whether it's man-made food or whether it's plant-based food. You eat glucose. When you eat glucose, it goes in your blood glucose rises. When your blood glucose rises, your body senses that, and it puts insulin into your blood from your pancreas. When insulin goes into your blood, that starts to bring the glucose down. It doesn't make glucose disappear. It starts putting the glucose where it needs to go. So insulin, if you're active after you eat, the glucose that's in your blood, then the insulin will push the glucose into your muscles. It'll also replenish glucose stores if you need to, which you do not have very many. And most people don't have to worry about replenishing the glucose stores because they have so much glucose on board anyway. But the majority of the glucose, any excess glucose that you eat, and just real quick, any glucose that you eat, period, is excess glucose. We do not ever have to eat glucose at all. If you take all the blood out of our bloodstream, take the glucose out of it, it only comes to 2 teaspoons of sugar. So the majority of all the glucose that you put in your mouth, it goes to the liver, and the insulin tells the liver, turn all that glucose, turn that into triglycerides. That's a form of fat. So all the glucose, all the stuff that you're eating, this plant-based foods, it's getting turned into glucose. The glucose goes into your liver. Insulin tells it to turn into triglycerides. So now inside your liver produces 2 different types of fat. It produces cholesterol, which is very important. About 80% of all the cholesterol we use is made out of the liver. However, every single cell in our body uses cholesterol. Every single cell in the body can make cholesterol. Cholesterol is extremely important. Our brains take 20% of all the cholesterol our body makes is used by the brain. So cholesterol is extremely vital, and blocking its production causes all kinds of havoc in your body and by killing your cells. Now, you have all these triglycerides and cholesterol in the liver. So now the liver has to put that triglycerides and the cholesterol, they need to be able to package that to move it all around your body for all the places that fat and cholesterol are used in our body. And there's so many different things, but you can't throw fat in the bloodstream. So what you do is the liver takes this fat and this cholesterol, puts it together, and then wraps a protein around it. This is what's called a VLDL, a very low density lipoprotein. When you go to get your cholesterol checked, you're going to look at your VLDLs, very low density lipoproteins, your LDLs, low density lipoproteins, and HDLs, high density lipoproteins. HDLs are made in the gut, but the VLDLs are made in the liver. And then, so you have this very low density. I call them fat mobiles because that's all they are. They're just little fat mobiles that are moving all this fat and cholesterol around your bloodstream to deposit it where it needs to go. So it puts all this triglycerides and this cholesterol into this VLDL fat mobile. The VLDL comes out of liver, goes around, starts putting all the cholesterol, all the triglycerides to all the places it's needed. As it does that, this big VLDL fat mobile starts shrinking because it doesn't have as much cargo. It's gotten rid of a lot of the triglycerides and some of the cholesterol. So it shrinks. So it goes from a very low density to low density. So a VLDL becomes an LDL. LDLs, perfectly normal. If you don't have LDLs, you would die. These are extremely important. But again, they're just carrying the fat around to all the places that's needed. But once all the fat that's needed all is put there, all the rest of the fat goes to the fat cell and it gets stored so you can have energy for a later time. So what happens is you take these VLDLs, they go down to LDLs. The LDLs are going around your fat cells, and outside of your fat cell, there is an enzyme. Okay, this enzyme is called an LPL. It's a it's a lipoprotein lipase is what it is. But the function of the enzyme is when the LDL comes around to give it the triglycerides are too big to go across the membrane into the fat cell. So LPL has to cleave off the fatty acids. There's 3 fatty acids on a triglyceride. That's why it's called a triglyceride. There's 3 fatty acids and then a glycerol backbone. I tell people it kind of looks like a big capital E. So the backbone is the glycerol, and then you have the 3 fatty acids. So when the LDL goes to the fat cell has these LPL enzymes on the outside that cleaves those free fatty acids off there and takes it inside the cell, and it stores it there. Then your cell puts that back into triglycerides and it's stored. So that's the key. When your insulin levels are high, because you put glucose in your bloodstream, insulin, 1, it tells the liver to turn that glucose into triglycerides. And 2, insulin also stimulates that LPL to cut those triglycerides, those free fatty acids off so they can get inside the fat cell to be stored. That's very important because insulin is what stimulates that LPL. Now, the triglycerides on the inside of the fat cell, and now we need energy. Say it's in the middle of the night, or say you're being healthy and you're doing intermittent fasting or this time-restricted eating, whatever you want to call it. It's both. But when you do that, then now your body needs that energy, and which it's supposed to get. So it gets the energy from your fat cells. So when you're hungry, or not when you're hungry, but when you've been fasting, your insulin levels are low because you haven't been putting any glucose in your blood. When your insulin levels are low, that stimulates, there's another enzyme on the inside of the fat cell that does the exact same thing that the LPL did on the outside. And this hormone on the inside, or this enzyme on the inside, is called hormone sensitive lipase. It's an HSL. And again, so what that does is the exact same thing. It cleaves off the free fatty acids so they can come across the cell membrane from the inside of the fat cell into the blood, so we can circulate that around and we can use that for our energy source. This is very important. This is the kind of key. High insulin levels stimulate that enzyme on the outside, and it inhibits the HSL, the enzyme on the inside. So when your insulin levels are high, all you can do is store fat. You cannot burn it because you've inhibited HSL. However, when it's the opposite, when your insulin levels come down low, now you do not stimulate LPL, you stimulate HSL. So you bring the fat out of your fat cells and use that for energy or all the other things that fat's used for in our body. So the key to losing fat is keep your insulin levels low. It's not about calories, it's about the calorie source. If you use glucose for your calorie source, your insulin level is going to be high and you're going to be stuffing fat into your fat cells. When you use fat for your energy source, your insulin levels will be low and you'll be eating the fat out of your fat cells. And that's exactly what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to fill our fat cells during the times that we eat and then use all that fat for our energy source during the times that we don't eat. And so it's fill, burn, fill, burn, fill, burn is the way we're supposed to do it. But what we've been doing for the last 40, 50 years is the food companies and drug companies have gotten everybody eating all this food all day long, eat every 2 to 3 hours, eat this man-made food. So you're constantly keeping your insulin levels high. So you're constantly stuffing fat into your fat cells and it's making us sick. And that's what I want to explain to you for the rest of this. So normally there's only about 3 main times that our bodies actually gain more fat cells. That's in the first year of life or so, during infancy. So babies, they're making a lot more fat cells for later. Then in early childhood, like from 6 to puberty, that's when you can also start making more fat cells on your body. And then again, in adolescence, around 18 to 20, we can make more fat cells then. This is going to be key. The genetics come into this, but what happens, insulin resistance, and this is important, as these LDLs are going around and putting these triglycerides into these fat cells, the fat cells swell bigger and bigger until all of a sudden the fat cell cannot swell anymore. It's as big as it can get. So now when an LDL comes through with more triglycerides, the fat cell's like, I can't hold anymore. I don't want that. So what it does is the LDL just passes on by and goes to the next fat cell and it puts the triglycerides in that. Since we have fat cells all over our body, we are slowly filling all our fat cells with triglycerides. Again, we're supposed to be burning those during the times that we don't eat, but since we eat all the time, we're not doing that anymore. But insulin resistance, when that cell is so stuffed full of fat, the LDLs come by and it cannot take any more triglycerides into the fat cell. So there's nothing wrong with insulin. It's doing everything it's supposed to do. It's turned the glucose into triglycerides and it's come down and it's allowed the LPL to put the triglycerides into the fat cell. The only thing is the fat cell is so stuffed. There's nothing wrong with the insulin. There's nothing wrong with the cell. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's just too stuffed. It can't take any more. There's nothing wrong with your pancreas. It's producing the insulin. So insulin resistance is when you have a totally stuffed fat cell. Now, remember, you have fat cells all over your body. So that's why it takes prediabetes isn't what the drug companies are telling you is prediabetes. Prediabetes happens 10, 20, 30 years before you get diabetes because prediabetes is a state where your insulin levels are high, but your glucose levels are normal. Because as you eat glucose, your insulin goes high. But when you eat glucose over and over every day, all throughout the years and decades, it takes more and more insulin to bring that down. So if you go to the doctor and you see your glucose levels are high, he's going to say, oh, you're perfectly fine. And then the next day you go in, next time you go in and he said, okay, now your glucose is high. You're diabetic because you don't look at glucose. A high blood glucose is just a symptom of diabetes. It's a symptom. Type 2 diabetes is insulin resistance. And remember, it's nothing wrong with the insulin. It's the cells are too fat. So that's what's really going on is you're slowly stuffing each one of your fat cells. And as each one of those fat cells get so stuffed, then it takes more and more insulin to try to get the glucose into these other cells. So I just want you to understand that, okay, with insulin resistance, it's just the fat cells are too full. And that's when it becomes resistant. Now, that comes into genetics. What happens now? Because there are I get asked questions, why are there thin people who still have type 2 diabetes? The reason for this is because there are some people, due to their genetics, they just have very few fat cells and they cannot make any more. So when you have very few fat cells in your subcutaneous tissue and these LDLs are going around putting triglycerides in there, once those fat cells are stuffed, there's nothing else you can do. all the body can do, all those little fat mobiles, those LDLs can do, is since they can't put the fat in your subcutaneous fat cells anymore, it starts stuffing fat around your organs. And this is where damage happens. It's where you get the fatty liver disease, fatty pancreas, fatty heart, fatty kidney failure, and dialysis. Type 2 diabetes is the number one reason for that because of these high glucose, high insulin, and inflammation in our bodies. Okay. So these people that are thin, they have just few fat cells. Once they're stuffed, they start putting the fat all around their organs. So they become insulin resistant very quickly. And it's called TOFI, TOFI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. And that's what's going on. So they're still insulin resistant because they don't have very many fat cells. Now, another type that I get asked about, why are there people who are extremely large and they don't have diabetes? Why is that? The reason why is because there's two different types of genetics. There are some people that when their fat cells get stuffed, they're done. They can't make any more cells. So all that fat goes to the organs, like we just said. However, there's other people that as their cells start to get full, they just make more fat cells. So they actually can make more fat cells. So if you're the type that you have the fixed number of fat cells and those fat cells are just getting stuffed, that's called lipid hypertrophy. Okay, you're getting a big fat cell. However, if you're the kind that can just keep making more and more fat cells, that's called lipid hyperplasia. It means you just make them. So since you can make more and more fat cells, the fat cells you have, they never get stuffed. So you can get fatter and fatter, but you still don't get diabetes because you haven't totally stuffed that fat cell yet. But for the majority of us, we do have a fixed number of fat cells, but it's a little bit more than the TOFI people. So we have a lot more fat cells, but we still can't make any more. So genetically, it depends on how many fat cells you have as far as how long it takes for you to eat the way that's killing you. How long is it going to take before you actually end up with type 2 diabetes? And it's when all your fat cells are full. And I talked about this in episode number 100 called Obesity Without Diabetes, the exception to the rule. So if you want to hear more about that, I did a whole podcast just on that. But for most people, we have a fixed number of fat cells, even though that might be a lot, but once those are filled, that's when we become a type 2 diabetic. Once our fat cells are full, our body has no other choice but to store that fat around our internal organs. And that's what we don't want. Now, I want to talk to you about other things. So fat cells do not just store fat. That's what we used to find. When I was in school, that's what I was taught. But now we realize that fat cells are actually an endocrine organ, which means they produce a lot of hormones and enzymes. They produce a lot of things that our body actually needs. In fact, there's well over 10 different hormones that we have discovered that our fat cells actually make. One of those I've talked about, it's called leptin. So leptin is an enzyme or a hormone that when you fill your fat cell, as you start filling, your fat cells will produce a hormone called leptin. And I've talked about this in episode 34. It's called What Determines Whether You Store Fat or Burn It for Energy. Leptin is a hormone that goes up to the medial hypothalamus in the brain when you eat and says, I am full. I'm not hungry anymore. Stop eating. And so that's when you lose your hunger signal and you stop eating. That's the way it's supposed to be. But what's happened, what we've noticed is we used to think that was the key. All we'd have to do is give people leptin and it'd make them where they weren't hungry anymore. However, we totally forgot about what resistance means. Resistance means that you are subjecting something to, let's give an example. We've talked about the pleasure center in the brain, okay, the nucleus accumbens. The nucleus accumbens is where you get your pleasure. When you start eating all this glucose, they found out that glucose stimulates the nucleus accumbens the same way cocaine does. So at first, it takes a little bit to get that feel-good feeling with the sugar, but eventually it takes more and more because the nucleus accumbens starts to become resistant. It doesn't want pleasure all the time. It makes it where it's not pleasurable anymore. So the nucleus accumbens becomes resistant to pleasure. So it takes more and more cocaine or more glucose to get that pleasure because you've caused resistance in the nucleus accumbens. Now, once you quit the cocaine or quit eating the glucose, that will get better. Your nucleus accumbens will come back and you'll start to have pleasure again. This also happens with leptin, because what they found is the more fat cells you have, the more leptin you have. So this hormone that used to make you feel full, now your hypothalamus has become resistant to it because you have so many fat cells producing all this leptin that the medial hypothalamus becomes resistant. And now when you eat, you don't get that signal to tell you to stop eating. So people just keep eating. Another thing, just a real quick side note, insulin, when you eat glucose and your insulin levels go high, it's thought that insulin just by itself also blocks leptin. So that's two different things that you're doing by eating this glucose that's making it where you're hungry more often. And there's other things also, but that's just two. So just like I said, you get pleasure resistance with the nucleus accumbens. You get leptin resistance when you have all these full fat cells. The other one is the insulin resistance. That's again, you get insulin resistance because the fat cells are full. You can't take any more insulin. So what happens? First, there is another hormone called aromatase. Okay, this one, and I'm only going to talk about four main things right now that go on inside the fat cells. There's an enzyme called aromatase. Aromatase has high concentrations in ovaries, and then also you have a little bit of concentration in the testes, and then you also have it in your fat cells. What aromatase does is it converts testosterone into estrogen. So since your fat cells have aromatase, as you have more and more fat on you, you actually are turning a lot of your testosterone into estrogen. So the more fat cells you have, the more estrogen you have and the less testosterone you have. And again, so as you start losing that fat, when you start eating healthy again, when you start losing that fat, then you're going to be losing some of that and you'll be able to get your testosterone levels back up again. That's aromatase. The other thing is your fat cells. Remember, you have a lot of fat. It's not just one layer. You have multiple layers of fat cells. So what happens is these fat cells start to get full. Okay, you just picture like bubbles in a bubble bath. If these fat cells, as they start to get full, they push away from the blood supply. They get further and further away from the blood supply because they're just getting full and getting pushed away. So since the fat cells need a blood supply because it needs to get the nutrients in, it needs to get the hormones out, what it does is it secretes these things. They're called cytokines. Okay, these are inflammatory mediators. Cytokines like interleukin 6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha. But what it does is it releases these enzymes to stimulate that blood vessel to start growing so they can start growing back to where they are since they've been pushed to the back of the fat cell line, they need blood to come back there. So they're releasing all these cytokines into your bloodstream trying to get that. So again, the more fat cells you have, the more cytokines are being released. So the more inflammation you have in your body. So just by being obese, you're having more estrogen, less testosterone, and you also have inflammation throughout your body. Another thing that fat cells produce is an enzyme called angiotensinogen, is the precursor to what's called angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 turns into angiotensin 2, and that's a very strong vasoconstrictor. It makes your blood vessels constrict down. If you're on a blood pressure medication called an ACE inhibitor, or an angiotensin 2 receptor binder like Cozar, if you're taking blood pressure medication like that, that's what it's doing. It's trying to stop having angiotensin 1 be converted to angiotensin 2 or stop the effect on angiotensin 2. So it allows your blood vessels to dilate. So that's hitting it on the other side with medication, which has all kinds of adverse effects. If you hit it on the front side and you decrease your fat cells, you won't have as much angiotensin or angiotensinogen. And so you're not going to have as much angiotensin 1, which means no more angiotensin 2, which means you'll be able to keep your blood vessels dilated and you'll decrease your blood pressure. These were just some, because I know these are the types of medications people are on, and I want to make sure that they realize that their fat cells, an increased number of fat cells can make all this stuff worse. You have way more estrogen, a lot less testosterone, way more inflammation. Now you're putting out products that are causing higher blood pressure. So Now, fat cells, again, we need all these things. We need the cytokines. We need the angiotensinogen. We need all these other modulators also that fat cells produce. But when you have a massive amounts of fat cells, we're producing way more than we need. And that's where the inflammation, that's where a lot of the other issues that we get come from. So that's why I wanted to let you know a fat cell is not just there for fat storage. However, and it's really not there just for fat storage. It's there for fat storage and then to burn and store and burn so that it helps regulate our energy levels. That's the way it's supposed to be when we quit bombarding ourselves with glucose like we've done since the dietary guidelines came out. Because that's what the marketing technique of a food pyramid, which they promoted to everybody acting like that was science, and it was not. That's why that food pyramid, the whole thing is about eating carbohydrates. Our bodies are made out of fat. It's made out of protein. That our whole bodies are. We are not made out of carbohydrates. So if you're looking at food as nutrients, which is exactly what you should be doing, food is nutrients that our body needs to grow, heal, thrive, and survive. We need protein. We need fat. We need cholesterol. We need vitamins. We need minerals. We need water. We do not need glucose. We do not need carbohydrates at all. We can get all the vitamin minerals from meat. And again, I'm not saying go carnivore. Some people can, and it's great and good. However, what I am saying is you don't need to be eating all the potatoes that you want to, all the seed oils, all the ultra processed foods. You don't need to be eating all this glucose all the time. Real fruit, real vegetables, real meat. Just stick to that. Don't make this harder than it has to be. It's really not hard. If it comes from an animal, eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, meat, all that you're good with. Your body knows exactly what to do with it. If it comes from a plant, just be careful. There are phytotoxins that are in there. And then if you're getting the plants from the grocery store, you have to worry about all the chemicals that the food companies are spraying on it also. But if you can get your fruits and vegetables from a farmer's market, you're getting them seasonally, you're not eating them constantly. Use it as a condiment. Don't make a great big salad and think you're eating healthy, because you're not. If you eat a great big salad, you're giving yourself extremely low amounts of protein, extremely low amounts of fat, but you're getting a lot more glucose. So when you're eating a salad and think you're being good, you're not. You're eating the kind of stuff that's actually going to make you fatter. So be careful with that. And there's a big difference between fat loss and weight loss. These people who are doing weight loss by going on these liquid diets or taking medications that keep you feeling full so you don't eat. When you do not eat your nutrients, your body's going to get the nutrients that it already has inside of it. So for its energy, when you don't eat glucose, it uses your fat for your energy source like you want it to. However, you're also not eating very much protein, especially if you think that the protein you're supposed to be eating is vegetables and fruit and vegetables. So you're not getting very much protein. So your body is going to take the protein from your muscles because it cares about your organs. You can cut off your arms and legs and you're still going to live. And your body knows this. So it will start tearing your muscles apart to take the protein to help with the organs, try to keep your organs alive, including your brain. So yes, your fat's going to come off because you're using it for energy source like we're supposed to, but your muscle is going to be coming off too. You're going to start having muscle wasting. And this is horrible. Because when you have muscle wasting, you need muscle to help you be healthy throughout your later years. And if you wear it off now, it's going to be very hard to get that back. Also, when you're not eating, you're not getting the vitamins and you're not getting the minerals. So you're tearing your muscles and tearing things down to get the vitamins and minerals that your body needs as well. So that's why what you want to do with a weight loss program is lose the fat and keep the muscle. The way you lose the fat and keep the muscle is keep your insulin levels low. Then you burn your fat, but you're eating protein. So you're still giving your muscles all the protein it needs, all the vitamins, all the minerals. You should be drinking your water. So when you do not eat glucose, you actually lose fat and you don't lose muscle. And that's what you want to do. That is the key to all this. But remember, fat cells do more than just store food or store energy. It helps regulate your hunger through like the leptin, and there's some other ways also. It helps regulate your blood pressure. Angiotensinogen was just one example. It also helps inflammation. The more fat cells you have, the more inflammation you have in your body, the more pain you're going to have, the more issues you're going to have. So you want to decrease the fat cells for that reason. And then again, they have things like aromatase that's going to turn testosterone into estrogen. So the more fat cells you have, the more estrogen you have, less testosterone. So fat cells are extremely vital to life. We cannot live without them. Do not be afraid of fat. You just want to be able to stuff your fat cells and then empty it, stuff it and then empty it. That means that you go long periods of time without eating. And that's easier to do when you eat animal products, because there's so many different things, even within the intestines, that fat and protein stimulate to keep you feeling full. You do not get that when you eat carbohydrates. When you eat plant-based foods, you don't get that very often. And that's why you're eating every 2 to 3 hours, because you're starving all the time, because you never give your body the nutrients that it needs, and you don't stimulate any of the receptors that cause you to feel full. So that's fat. Do not be afraid of fat, but you do not want too much on your body. You need to get that down, but save the muscles. So decrease your carbohydrate intake, keep your insulin levels low, burn your fat, eat protein to stimulate your muscles, and you will be well on your way to having a good, quality, healthy life. And that's what I want for you. And just a quick reminder that our podcast name is going to be changing to Nutrition Prescription, Wellness versus Medications. And so that's all I have for you now. Have a wonderful week. And as always, make simple, healthy choices to live a quality life. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button below and be sure to tell someone else who may want to change their health path as well. And remember, if you would like to enroll in our new online Thrive Naturally Transformation course to help you reach your new improved health goal, to reverse type 2 diabetes, feel great, and get off medications, we are here to help. Just go to our website, drstevehewlett.com, and click on the Work With Us tab at the top of the page. We truly are here to help you get off medications and start living the vibrant, pain-free life that you would love to live.